All right. Hello out there. I think we're live now. It's looking good. Anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Today I wanted to talk a lot about AAA development versus indie stuff, working in Unity and other engines, and just take some questions and answer them, see what I can do to help people out. If you guys have questions, there's a link in the description to a form. Just put them in there. Don't put them in chat just because chat tends to scroll by so fast I can't keep up with it. The form makes it nice and easy for me to go through and just not miss people's questions and answer them. Um, I think I'll kick it off just by talking about the other stuff that I was going to talk about, and then we'll dive into questions as they build up. There are already some in there. I figure that there will be a lot of them in there after I get done just talking a little bit about my experience doing AAA stuff versus working on indie projects. Also, I just wanted to mention that I do plan on doing a live stream sometime soon where we're going to talk about high performance networking. Kyle said he'd be happy to come on sometime and just clear some things up and talk about stuff. He did mention that I mispronounced the network framework like multiple times and said GNet. It's ENet, not a G. So we'll be talking about that, about how to put together high performance network stuff. That'll be in hopefully the next stream whenever he's free and available, and we can get on there and do that. And then also there will be another video coming up soon on state machines. We'll do some advanced state machine stuff. This will not be a live stream, and then there will be one that I'm doing on tweening and queuing systems. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, they're coming. Whether you're interested or not, they're coming. But if you're interested, hopefully that's exciting and good stuff, and it'll be here relatively soon. Also, if you're just starting out watching it, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the little bell, and all the other things, or just share it. I think that's the best thing you can do is share it and get more people in here, more questions, and then hopefully they'll ask things that other people don't think to ask, and we'll get answers to stuff. Anyway, let's just get going. I want to start again by talking about AAA development versus indie development. I've done quite a bit of both. I actually started off my game development career working solely on AAA games. I think I've mentioned it before, but the one up there, Vanguard, was the first actual AAA game that I got to work on. And it was a blast, and I got to work on a couple other games at the company. And the experience was really interesting and really fun. And at the time, I didn't really know the differences between indie stuff and AAA stuff. In fact, indie stuff was relatively small at the time. There weren't a lot of indie companies. I guess there wasn't a lot of like a big indie industry like there is now. Now there are way more indie companies that are smaller than there are AAA companies out there. At the time, that wasn't really the case. Most of the small companies ended up being AAA companies. So, when I guess there are some big differences though that I noticed when I was working in AAA versus indie stuff, and I think starting off with just the sheer team size, everybody kind of knows that in a AAA project you're going to have a relatively large team. It's going to be quite a bit bigger than an indie team. In fact, in my experience, it's like 5 to 10 times larger on a AAA project. And that's because there's a lot of funding and a lot of pressure to do something big and on a very specific timeline with marketing goals and all this other stuff in mind. So everybody scales up really fast, and then the teams are just giant. What that means as a programmer, though, is that your tasks end up being very specific. So I did all my AAA development just as a programmer. I actually wanted to be a game designer when I started out, but found out that programming was, well, it paid better. It was a little bit more interesting, and I was pretty good at it. So it's kind of where I stumbled into it. But when you're working on programming in a AAA company, you tend to be very specialized. You tend to have very specialized roles for what you're doing. I've mentioned this before that when I started off, I was actually doing tools development, and I started literally doing solely tools development. In an indie company, you're not really going to find that. You're not going to find anybody who's generally just doing tools. You'll probably find people who specialize a bit in tools, and maybe one or two people work on the tools, but they're also working heavily on the game code and the server code or whatever you have for your type of game, generally whatever your gameplay stuff is. And you don't end up with quite as much siloing and specialization like you do in these bigger companies. And the big ones, it's just you've got this specialty, you work on that thing, and you're working on that thing maybe all the way through the game. And I saw a lot of people do that, where they would come in, they would get one thing that they were working on, like one subsystem, and they would work on that subsystem for years, and that was kind of their main thing that they did. In indies, that's just not really an option, partially because of the sizing. Now, that's also why indie games can do some really, or AAA games can do some really amazing things, because you can have people who specialize solely in one thing and are amazing at it. They're really, really good at it, and they don't have to do the things that they're not amazing at or not really good at. With an indie company, you generally have to do a bit of everything. It's imagine like you're the sole developer on there. You're doing all of it. If you've got, 3 or 4 programmers, you can imagine that nobody can just do one thing and specialize in just one thing. Everybody's got to contribute all over the place, and priorities change. And a lot of the time, there's not a lot of work in a specific subset. Where with a AAA company, there's always going to be a lot of things that you can do just deep in your specialty. If it's graphics stuff, tool stuff, networking stuff, you could easily have just a single person or a single subset of people just working on that stuff the entire time. And another really big difference for me, at least, was the way that we'd get these tasks. So when I was working on Vanguard and EverQuest 2, what would generally happen, like the way that you would get your new task for whatever it was, the week, the month, the quarter, and a lot of these time these tasks ended up being very long, was through some meeting process. So what would generally happen is the producers and the leads would have a meeting with the design team, which was, I guess, one of the leads or a set of the leads, and they would come together and build out a plan for the thing that we're going to do for the next 3 months or the next 6 months, or sometimes even the next 9 months, depending on the project and where you were with that. So they would come together, figure out what this plan is, and then they would kind of give it off to the different sub leads, so like the programming lead, the design lead, and then those people would then figure out who was on the team was going to work on what thing based on their specialties and their just availability. So we'd have these big tracking things where we'd track like who's working on what for how long, how many weeks we estimate this project to be, or how many weeks we estimate this single task to be. And then that would all be in some big system driven by the production team, which would be the APs or the EP, which the associate producers or executive producers. So they would kind of set up this stuff, and then you'd go to a meeting and you'd end up saying, hey, these are the tasks. Sometimes what would happen is we'd go into like a programming meeting with the full team, and the lead or leads would say, well, we have this thing and this thing and this thing, and we think that these people should work on it. And then we would talk about it a little bit. And then sometimes another person on the team would go, oh, no, I can take that. I'll do that. I think that's really interesting and I want to do it. But I'd say most of the time it was very top-down driven. It was, these are the priorities, these are the things we need, and these are the people that are going to work on it. It was very much a more managed scenario. When you're working in something like an indie team, though, it's, I'd say, very different. Usually there's a lot more direct communication like with the creative team and the producers between everybody. And I think that's just a side effect of being smaller and needing to be more reactive and a bit more agile. And the tasks also don't end up being as long term. So you don't end up with these 3-month and 6-month plans where everything is broken down. I've seen people try to do it on an indie team, and it doesn't generally work, because in indie teams, everybody is communicating essentially with everybody else, or at least with the people that they're working with directly all the time. Now, in a AAA company, when we would work on design related features, so a designer says, hey, I need this new functionality. I need flying mounts, or I need this new class functionality for this one class that we're building. The designers would interact very directly with the programmer who was assigned to it, but that was kind of about it. There wasn't a lot of communication outside of that unless there was a very specific task. Now, you could, of course, go back and forth and just talk to the designers, and I highly recommended it for everybody who was doing it. Like, make good friends with the designers and the people that you're working on and make that communication open. But it's not as forced as with an indie company, and I really personally prefer the forced communication that you get with an indie company, because I feel like you have a better idea of what they want instead of everything coming through a doc. Although I totally agree, docs are super important. Design docs are really important. But instead of everything coming through a design doc and just getting communicated by a second or third person, with indie companies, you tend to be directly communicating with the designers on what it is that they want built and how it's going to look and how you're going to put that together. Another thing with communication too was in those big AAA companies, you don't tend to get to communicate with players as much, which I think is kind of sad. And I know that there are reasons for it. It's just I think essentially that people are worried that if everybody in the company is communicating with the player base and you have a large player base, it's easy for mixed messages to get out there and confusion and then get angry players and stuff. But you also miss a lot of that direct feedback. You don't. I guess one of the things I found was that a lot of times in AAA companies, the people working on the games aren't even playing the games that they're working on. They're not really interested in the game. Maybe they were interested in it for a while and then they stopped playing it. In indie games, that doesn't tend to be the case. Usually when people aren't interested in the game that they're working on in an indie company, they leave and they go find another game that they want to work on that they're interested in. And I think it's important that no matter what you're working on, you're playing the game and into it. Of course, there are going to be some cases where people are working on something that is totally designed for a different target audience. Maybe you're working on a game that's made for toddlers or something. In that case, I get it, right? You're not going to be doing that. But for most games, if you're not playing the game that you're working on, it's very easy to do the wrong thing and waste a lot of time on stuff. One of the other things, I guess, there were two more things that were really big differences that I noted. And that was with the bigger teams, I think people underestimate what the producers do. Usually what happens is the associate producers, the APs, tend to kind of keep the project running and keep things going. The main producer will have this big plan of what's going on and stuff, but a lot of time the heavy lifting of keeping things going and keeping the project on task and making sure everything is going on right is the job of the associate producers, which is almost like a thankless job because they're going around and kind of riding you to make sure that you're doing the right things and that you're getting things done. But it's a really important thing that they do. And it's also kind of an interesting, I'd say, game career option for people who aren't really interested in programming but want to get into the industry, because there's not a whole lot of competition for those positions from what I've seen, and there's a lot of value and really a lot of influence on the game too. Like, they don't necessarily have a lot of design influence, but they have a lot of influence on making sure that the project actually gets done. So if you're interested in game development but you don't think of yourself as a programmer or a designer or an artist, you just kind of want to do something in the industry, looking at those production types of jobs, I think is a great option. It's definitely something interesting to do. And then the final big difference that I wanted to talk about was with the AAA companies, they're almost always working on multiple projects. The bigger companies have tons of projects, and when you're working on something, if it gets stale and it gets old and you're not really interested in it, a lot of the time you'll have the ability or option to switch projects. Sometimes you might have to ask for it and be a little bit vocal about it. But I've seen tons of people just switch from projects that they've kind of lost interest in over to something that they thought was a little bit new, a little bit interesting, and they could totally kind of revitalize themselves, which kind of brings me into some of these questions that have popped up here. So again, if you guys have questions about this stuff or just general game development stuff, there's a form linked in the description, so just make sure that you go put the question in there so that I see it and don't miss it. If they're in chat, they just tend to scroll by so fast that I miss them. So put them into that form. I'm going to go through the form and just start answering the questions as quick as I can and try to hit everybody's questions. And also, don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the little bell, and share this with all your friends and your grandma and everything else. The more people that hit like, the better, because then more people come in, we get more interesting questions, and yeah, it's just fun. It makes it more exciting for me too. Anyway, I'm going to jump into some of the questions now, and first I'm going to take a drink. Then I'm going to jump into the questions. There's some interesting ones down here. Okay, this first one says it might not be applicable to this topic, but I was wondering if you'd put game projects from courses you've taken into a portfolio as a very new developer with less than 7 months experience who's looking for jobs. It feels like a shame to forget about all of them as I got over 40 games that I made like that. Or should I create some new ones to add to the single game that I've made on my own? Oh, okay. Create some. So if you're looking for a job in game development and you don't have a portfolio, you're just kind of crippling yourself. So it's a very important thing to do, especially nowadays. I think you could get away with not having a portfolio before. think that now it's such a big differentiator when people can just click through your resume and go directly to the link. And also, if you link your portfolio in your resume, make sure that it works. Make sure that it works in the viewers and editors that people are using. Don't put in a bad link that goes to a 404 or something else, or just isn't a valid link. Make sure those are good. But for the type of stuff that I put on there, I don't know that I would necessarily just put game projects where you just followed the course and did exactly what the course did. What I would do instead is take one or two of those that were interesting, that you have some unique ideas for and can do a unique take on, and then expand them out. So say like whatever the game type is, take a look at it and see if there's some new twist or feature or functionality that you can add that makes I'd say a noticeable difference and makes it more fun, or maybe combines the two games together and into a fun way, and put that up there instead. Say, hey, we started with this, and I took this kind of core base game and made it into something really cool and really interesting. That'll especially help as a game designer, but it also shows as a programmer slash developer that you know how to do things without just following instructions. Because if all you can do is just follow instructions, like step by step, and not create things kind of on your own, the value is going to be dramatically lower than if you can just get in there and say, hey, I want to make this plus this, and kind of make a mashup of these two things. That's a lot more valuable, and having that in your portfolio will be a lot better. But also make sure that whatever is in your portfolio feels polished and fun. Don't put something boring there. Don't put something there where people have to read a lot, or where people have to have some external knowledge of some specific genre or story or something else. Make sure that whatever it is can stand alone, kind of stand there on its own, and that if you gave it to a kid under 10, they could play it, understand it, and have a lot of fun with it and think that it was neat. Now, if you're just doing more technical stuff, then do technical demos in your portfolio. But I would recommend overall just putting in fun little mini games. They don't have to be anything giant, and you should be able to have fun with them within the first 30 seconds or so. If it's more than a minute, people aren't going to keep playing, because remember, when people are going through hiring and looking at resumes and portfolios, it's kind of a tiring, not very exciting task that most people aren't interested in doing. They want to get back to their work. So you want to make sure that you can wow them really fast. Don't make them read through a bunch of stuff. Don't make them do a bunch of work to get in there and play it. Make sure that they can get into the fun right away. Let's see, what was the next question? How is crunch in a AAA environment versus indie environment? I always hear horror stories of what it's like in big game companies, and how some of them end up having to sleep in the offices so they can work early the next day. It's a good question. I'd say surprisingly, I've seen almost the opposite. So in AAA stuff, generally people are working 9 to 5. Some people work a bit more, and sometimes people crunch a bit. I haven't seen a whole lot of that personally, and I've generally just not done it. I find that crunching is usually a side effect of bad planning and just lack of management. It happens when the plan changes constantly, or nobody is honest about how long things are going to take, and people just start making up these estimates for, oh, this thing's going to take a week, and it's really like a 3-month task. And then nobody reacts and responds and adjusts the timeline and starts to cut things or change things or figure out ways to make it faster. What happens is people just end up working longer and longer and longer and hacking things in. I've actually seen a lot more crunching, though, on the designer side than the programming side, surprisingly. Most programmers I know don't end up crunching very much. Most designers I know tend to be crunching a lot. And I don't know exactly why that is, not being a game designer, but they always seem like they've got more work to do than they have time for. And they also tend to be perfectionists who want to go in, they'll do something, and then they'll do it again and do it again and do it again until it looks exactly how they want and plays exactly how they want. In indie environments, though, what I've seen is that programmers tend to be working quite a bit more, because there's a lot more work to do and a lot less people to do it. Also, there's a lot more accountability. When you have a team of 3, 4, 5 programmers, you're a lot more accountable than you are when you've got a team of 20 or 30 programmers, because there's a lot of things going on in a bigger team. There are a lot of people who can come in and take over little parts of stuff, and there are a lot of other just moving parts going on in there. When you're in a small company, it's very, very hard to hide the fact that something is falling behind, because that something could be a giant percent. It could be 50% of what's planned and what's going on. Where in a big company, your thing that's falling behind may just be like one little bullet point on a giant list of things that are happening. So I found kind of the opposite. I've heard a lot of horror stories from people working in AAA companies, especially I think back when there was a lot less competition for companies. So you couldn't just go work at another game company because there was one in your city. And it made it so that sometimes people could be exploited or just overworked. But I think that generally crunching, again, I personally feel like it's a sign of a lack of management. Not necessarily bad management, but just not managing things properly and not being honest with yourselves about what's going on and where the project is. People get this whole idea, oh yeah, we're releasing in 3 months, but we still have 9 months worth of stuff to do, and we're not going to say anything until we're a month away or whatever, and we'll just keep pretending that it's going to get better. So I wouldn't worry too much about crunching. If you're just starting out, you might be doing it a little bit more. As you get more and more established in the industry, I think you can easily push back against it. And again, I haven't really had that problem where I ever was forced to crunch against my will. There were times where there were things that I just wanted to work on and got really invested in and kept going, and worked through the night. But there was never a time when I had to stay and sleep in the office or anything like that. Most people realize that when you're working too many hours, your productivity doesn't go up. You're not getting more done. So I don't know what the ideal is, but I've seen studies saying that, around 30 hours a week is the most that you're going to get of actually productive work. When you start having people work longer and later, you're actually making them less productive. They're making more mistakes. They're getting less done. They're starting to, it's hard to mentally focus on these things for a very long time and do a good job. That's another reason that I really like pair programming and mob programming, because you can kind of get that relaxation and everybody understands where the project is and how things are going, and things don't fall behind and just slip because everybody knows the status of stuff. Let's see, let's go on to the next one. It says, I'm currently working on a multiplayer game using Photon Pun 2, which is the Photon Unity networking library, and have a question about PvE enemies. Would a good way of handling this have all the enemy logic run on the master client and just update the position on the clients? Okay, so for the movement, not necessarily. You generally don't want to be sending out the movement updates all from the master client, or not by just updating the position. You'll want to send out some data about where, for NPCs especially, they tend to go like from one spot to another. You can just send out that position, like that starting position, the next ending position, or sometimes even the full path, along with some timestamp of where they are. So that way you can just keep updating the timestamp from that main client, that master client. Say, hey, like we're at server frame 300, and then the thing should be able to figure out where it should be at server frame 300 instead of pushing out the positions, because you're going to end up just spamming positions. You're going to have huge network load and latency problems. So if it's just that, I would say, yeah, send out the start positions, the end positions, and then that server frame time, and then let the clients all handle it for each of the enemies. But I mean, I think that kind of answers that, hopefully. By the way, don't forget, if you have questions, make sure that you just submit them. Here, let me just kind of switch views real quick and show you guys what I'm reading off of. So the forum is right here. It's linked in the description. So you can just go in there and submit your questions, and I'm just going through these. The only reason I'm not screen sharing them, sometimes people like to put inappropriate stuff in there. But if you've got questions, just submit them in there, and I'm going to go through them just one after the other and read them off, answer them as best I can. And also, again, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share, and all that stuff. We're only at like 40 likes out of 115 people. So let's get those numbers up, and let's go on to the next question. So let's see. It says, sometimes I feel excited to work and I feel like I'm doing a lot of work, while suddenly I lose all interest in life, get depressed being solo, and feel like I'm not doing any work at all. Yeah, that's a rough one. I mean, that happens, I think, to most of us. I would say all of us, but there's probably some people out there who don't have this problem. I get the same thing, and I find that finding a short distraction tends to help for me. It doesn't necessarily help for everybody, but finding a short little distraction, even if it's as simple as just going for a walk or going to the grocery store or something, can help me speed up a little bit. Now, if it's more longer term and it's not just like the day where you're just like, I can't do anything this day, and sometimes you just need to take a day off and think and recuperate. Another option that I like to do is starting to do some pair programming and just getting another developer in there and talking to other programmers and developers about what they're doing. I find that it's really helpful to just kind of remotivate, give me new ideas, and re-spark stuff. Also, making sure that you're sharing what you're working on with other people and that other people are kind of getting some interest in it and you're getting some feedback on it. I think if you work too much on your own in a silo and nobody ever sees what you're doing, eventually you'll lose motivation for it. It's happened to all of us, but you've got to get out there and let people see what you're doing. Share it wherever. If you can get friends or other developers to look in there, I think that's best. And then again, the pairing and stuff like that tends to help a lot. Also, just come join one of our meetups and share your stuff there. Maybe people can help motivate you there. Maybe I'll post a link to that. You just search for Unity Architecture Meetup. You see it on Meetup. You can join up and come check it out and show your stuff off, and hopefully everybody can help motivate a bit more. Okay, so how to bring more discipline in work and monitor myself on the path to being an indie as we handle our own project and nobody is above us to monitor or question us. I like Trello for that. So putting together a board of the stuff that you want to do for the week, either on something like Trello or a just local whiteboard that you've got up with sticky notes or something, and having some short-term tasks and goals. So setting up goals that you want to do for the week along with goals that you want to do for the day. So I'll set up all of the things that I want to get done for the week in a project, and then I'll move them over to the stuff that I want to get done for the day when I begin the day. And then just making sure that those goals are actually somewhat rewarding and that they make sense too, that I'm not just setting arbitrary goals that don't make sense or just doing whatever I feel like that day. You really want to set up a small plan. I don't like to plan too far out in advance because I think that then you just end up replanning over and over and over and adjusting the plan. But I like to at very least have a plan for the thing that I'm going to do that week and then split that into little tasks for the day. And if I don't make all the tasks for the day, it's not the end of the world. I'll just move them up to the next day. Next day I'll hit them and then we'll get them all done. And that's, I'd say, the best advice I've got there. Just keeping it a little bit accountable. Also, I guess one other thing that works pretty well is if you have a group, if you're working solo and you don't have anyone else you're working with, set up a group of other people that are doing the same type of thing. Set up a little mastermind group. Find some people out there. There are hundreds or thousands of people out there, probably hundreds of thousands of people out there in the same boat, and just find a group of 3 or 4 other people and meet once a week to talk about your progress and to talk about what kinds of issues you're running into and how things are going. I find that if you have some small external accountability from another group of friends or people that you'll eventually become friends with, it can help a lot to make sure that you're getting things done. Just having that, I don't want to show up to the call without my things done, can kind of push you and motivate you. All right. Let's see what the next question is. For making my 3D game, I start making it in pieces. I find it a little hard to complete and assemble the pieces. Thanks for your help. You're awesome. Well, thank you for that. I'm not sure exactly how to answer this question. I guess what I like to do instead of just making a lot of pieces is make it functional as fast as possible and start it off making it make it work. I guess like what was the phrase Chris always said was make it work, make it right, and then make it fast. So kind of in that order. So I'll get things functional, get them working, and then so that way I can kind of see how the pieces are going to come together and how everything's going to interact. And then I'll start working on a little bit more cleanliness, separating things out and refactoring while I'm doing it, and then worry about performance right after that or once it's an issue. A lot of time people work on little pieces and focus on performance of a little thing that's going to get called once and not matter. You want to watch out for that kind of stuff. What's the right budget to spend on marketing an indie mobile game nowadays? Is 20 to 30K enough, or is it better to contact a publisher? I don't know. I know that the bigger mobile games spend, more than that every day. That's, their daily budgets tend to be higher than that. I don't know on the indie side how much they spend or how much that'll actually get you. I've seen, I've done that a bit where we spent a good amount of money on marketing and I saw no gains, like no real noticeable improvement at all. I think that in general, it's better to build up a community of people along the way and not try to wait until the end and then do a big marketing push. You're going to get people interested, waitlisting your game if it's on Steam or whatever it's on, I guess on mobile. You want to get people ready and excited about the game long before it's out, if you can, and then go from there. But when it comes to mobile, I don't feel like I have enough experience marketing those to give you really good advice. I just know that the budgets, even years ago, were 2 to 5 times that daily. It's kind of crazy the amount of money that goes into some of those marketing budgets. And I think that competing with them money wise is going to be really hard. I think that you really have to build up an audience of fans and people that are out there sharing it, that are genuinely interested in the game. Okay, how can I apply a sticking property to a 3D object so that whenever I take the object in play mode in front of a plane, it should stick to it? Oh, okay. Well, in play mode, you just do it with something in the update. So depending on exactly what you mean, if you just mean like you've got an object and you want it to stick to the ground, well, you can do something as simple as taking a raycast from the position of that thing. And usually what I do is raycast from a little bit above the position and shoot down a little bit, find the point where it hits that plane, and then move the object down to that position. If you're doing it inside the editor though, and it's not in play mode, like for design time stuff, you could also do that in the on inspector, no, on draw gizmos selected, so that when you have the object and you're moving it around, it can automatically snap down to the ground. It's a nice, easy trick. I did a video on that in a blog post on it. I can put the link in the description if you're interested. But if you just search for it, stick to ground, you should find that. And again, for anybody who's just joining in, if you have questions and you want to ask them, just submit them to the form on the page. In the description, there's a form. It just goes to this, and it lets me read them off one after the other so that I can go through them and not have to try to catch them in chat and miss people's questions. So if you got something, just submit it there. I don't know if I'll get to all of them, but I'm going to try. I'm talking as fast as I can to go through them all. Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share and all that stuff. See if we can get at least up to 100 likes on this thing. That'd be cool. Let's see. Let's go on to the next question. You mentioned keeping several scenes loaded for UI. How does the UI scene interact with your game scene? Cool. So I've talked about this a little bit in the past, and I still plan on doing a video on it sometime soon. But in general, for UIs, what I like to do now is have the UI be its own separate scene, either 1 or 2 scenes. Sometimes it's like one for the menu system and then another scene for the in-game UI. Now, the way that it interacts with the game scene is through some sort of binding. So depending on the type of game, I'll have a root game object for the interface, or maybe more than one. And then these objects will bind up to game objects in the actual game scene. So imagine I load up level 1 and I've got a player in there. When my UI turns on, it will get bound to that player. Either the simplest way to do it is just find the player when the UI turns on and set it up to automatically bind to it. Like you could do a simple thing like find game object to type, and then tell it to update all of its references based on that. Find the player, find the inventory, find the input system, whatever the things are. But you can also set up a scene management system. When you get to loading a bunch of scenes, you're going to want to have some sort of a scene manager that's loading in your level, and then once that level is done loading asynchronously, you'll load in your UI, and then that scene management system can say, hey, UI bind to this thing in the level. It knows what the thing in the level is, and it binds it up right there. And that's generally the route that I would go. So that way, the biggest benefit here is that you don't end up with a giant prefab for your UI, which is usually kind of a pain to work with, and you end up with an easy to work with UI scene. It's just, I find it a lot easier to work with a complete scene instead of a prefab for the UI, and then I can pull it in and out, and my UI could also be bound to test objects or other things, so I don't necessarily have to bind it directly to the real thing. I could bind it to something that I can unit test and run tests against the UI based on some fake or mock player or something like that. Let's see, what was the next question here? Is it possible for a single dev to develop a AAA game like Dirt 4 in under 3 to 5 years? Any AAA 3D projects made by a single person? I don't know about a single person, but maybe a small team. You could get, a team of a programmer, artist, and a designer or something, and you could develop some stuff like that. It just takes a reasonable scope. You need to have not just some crazy giant scope for the amount of stuff that you want to do, and experience, right? If you're just starting out, not a chance, right? 3 to 5 years trying to develop a good single or a good AAA project with a tiny team is it's nearly impossible. But if you've got a lot of experience and you know how to do it, especially if you've built that kind of game before, it's, I'd say, more possible. The biggest things that tend to eat a lot of time on those AAA games are the art pipeline, making things look beautiful, and then adding in all of the systems. And a lot of time the scope form is just huge. So you'd have to have a very tightly scoped game and something that the team or the single person knows how to build. Now, that said, you could also build most of it and then release it and ramp it up, and eventually it becomes like a AAA game, right? So how many hours of productive work do you usually do per week? Is it the 30 hours per week? How much variance is there? I'd say probably about 30 hours of actual productive work, not counting talking to people in meetings, recording YouTube stuff. And those are somewhat productive too, but the actual coding and stuff is all kind of in that about 30 hours of time. There's still time just talking to people, but I feel that once you get too much going on, you just start to lose productivity. Now, I know people who work like hardcore 60, 70 hours a week and feel productive and get things done the whole way along, but I think everybody's going to run into the problem where you eventually are just writing stuff that you want to delete, writing things that aren't as good, and code kind of falls apart. Let me see. Oh no, my questions are I totally lost place on my questions. I'm just going to go through them again. Let me go through them in individual mode real quick. So again, if you guys had questions while I'm scrolling through here trying to figure them out, just drop them onto the forum. It's in the description, and make sure you hit the like button when you do. And if you don't have a question, just go hit the like button instead. Okay, I'm gonna go through and find the next question. It started scrolling really fast when people put it in a bunch, and I lost my place, which is funny because the whole intent was to not do that. Okay, should an entry-level game developer look into getting into a AAA position first or into an indie studio? I'd say ideally you want to get into a AAA position if you can. It's a lot harder to do. There are a lot more indie studios out there, and getting into a AAA position can be quite a bit harder. But I think that the learning that you're going to get from joining a AAA company and the experience that you'll get there can go a long way, because you're not having to figure out everything. You're kind of learning from other pros and seeing what works, what doesn't work, and you have, I guess, a lot bigger team of people to pull from and to learn things from. So I would say look at both, try to get both, and go with whatever you can get. When you're starting off, again, it's easier to get in on an indie side, but AAA is probably more beneficial. And when you're going into a AAA position, I always recommend people look for the tools positions too. If you can get into those, they're usually easier to do. They're easier to get hired into. There's less people applying for them, and it's a good way to get into the company and get started. Let's see. What do you think of using Patreon for long-term funding for a game project? I don't know. I've never thought about that. I think it would probably be pretty hard. You would have to have something that people are really interested in getting into and playing, and to support it, but maybe it's possible. It's not something that I think would be easy to do though. But I mean, if you need long-term funding and the funding isn't too much and you can keep the costs down really low, it might work well. Also, streaming your game development can go a long way, just getting people in there and interested in what you're doing. And it might go a long way with getting the Patreon stuff up there too. But I'm not sure how well that would work as like an actual funding source for anything that wasn't relatively small scale and small cost. Let me see. What's the next question here? Somebody asked, as a solo indie dev, when should I start marketing my game and how should I start going about marketing it? I would say as soon as possible. Like start marketing it and talking to people about it as soon as you're working on it, and don't wait. Don't once you have your idea and you've gotten started on development, don't worry about it not being perfect at the beginning. It's going to be terrible when you start off, right? It's going to be very simple, blocky, placeholder stuff. Start right away, though. Get the idea out there, the concept out there, and listen to the feedback, too. Look for feedback. Look for ways to make your game better. Everybody has this idea of a perfect game in their head. There's always stuff that's missing, and if you talk to other people, talk to players and other developers, you're going to get a lot more ideas. But also, just get out there and market it right away. Don't try to wait until the end. Don't try to wait till you're halfway done. Do it right from the beginning, I'd say. Is there a particular reason or situation in which you would use private static methods? For anyone who doesn't know, private static method would just be a method inside your class that can't be accessed outside the class and doesn't have any object related state. So private just means that you can't access it from outside your class. Like you've got your player and your game manager can't read that private method or can't access that private method in the player. Only stuff inside the player could. And the static keyword just means that, well, there's only one version of that method and it's not unique to the specific instance. Like you've got say you had a rocket class. If you had a static method in there, that static method isn't going to have a knowledge of like what rocket you're talking about when you call it. It's going to be something that is shared among all rockets. It's the same method. Now you could access a static variable or you could pass in a non-static instance of something. In general though, the main thing that you would use for a private static method, or the main thing you would use that for, is doing some sort of data processing on something. So you're passing something into it that the rocket needs to know about, like figure out a path from here to here. And then that method is returning something back out. It's not usually adjusting state. You could have it adjusting some static initialized variable or some other variable that's on there that's static that applies to all of the instances of the class, which is another use for static stuff. Usually when it's applying to all instances of a thing, like I don't know, you could have like a cleanup method that cleans up all of them and it finds all of them and then does a cleanup on them. But I would say most of the time it's usually stateless stuff where you're doing some sort of a calculation that only applies to that thing. And then making it static doesn't make a huge difference. It just kind of reminds people that, hey, this thing is stateless and it should never have state in it, because then you're kind of doing something that this method wasn't intended for. So is there a good website you know of for linking up with other game creators? I don't know if there's a great website specifically. There are lots of cool Discord channels though. So I've got one, and I got a dog over here who just doesn't want to stop barking. And hold on one second. I got to stop this dog. All right, sorry about that. He was not going to stop growling. So, yeah, I don't know of any good specific websites, but there are definitely, I would say, jump into one of the Discord channels. Like, I've got one that I can share. I'll put it in the description after this is done. But there's also a lot of other ones out there. There's the Game Dev League. Brackeys has one that's pretty full of people. Charles from Infallible Code's got one. I would say jump into the Discord channels and just start talking to people there. And then look for meetups locally, too. It's a good way to meet other people, if there are some in your area. But, yeah, I don't know of any really good websites specifically. Let's see, next question. How much of what you learned has come from reading programming books? That's a really good one. So there are, I don't know if I could quantify it in a percent. There's a good amount of stuff that came from reading books, and that's generally around the solid principles and clean code. So most of the game programming stuff that I've learned is really from experience, some from books and reading, and a lot from just practice and trial and error and talking to other developers. But the things around code cleanliness, refactoring, and naming things well came from some very specific books, really. I don't have them up there, but the Clean Code and Code Complete, which are both amazing books. They're not C# based, but yeah, I don't think they need to be. They talk a lot about how to write clean code that's reusable and good. The other stuff, I guess, the other biggest place that I get information on programming stuff is video content. So it used to be a lot of Pluralsight stuff. I'd go through that. And now there's also there's so much on YouTube that it's easier to just go there and find exactly what I want. I really love watching like Bob Martin videos. They're great on that kind of stuff. I've got another dog jingling around. Sorry. But yeah, I'd say not a whole lot of it has come from books. When I started with Unity, though, I did grab a Unity book right from the beginning, went through the whole thing, and it was a little bit helpful. But it was, as most books are, when they get to be technical, they tend to get outdated really fast because the engines change so much, the languages change so much that by the time a book goes through the whole process of getting written, edited, published, and then me finding it and buying it, they tend to just be a little bit outdated. And then also reading and writing code from paper tends to be not as easy. And I don't think anybody else can hear the dogs, but I have a hard time concentrating when they're over there growling and jingling around. All right, let's see. What else we got here? Is it realistic to try for a remote position as your first programming job? Yeah, definitely. In fact, I know some programmers who are some of the best programmers I know who've only ever worked in remote positions, which is kind of surprising, but it's definitely possible. One of the key reasons that remote stuff is becoming so popular is just the cost, right? It's way cheaper to hire a developer to work remotely than it is to hire somebody to come in, set up an office space for them, pay for the office space, set up a whole computer system, manage the network there. If you can hire people to work remote and they can do the job right, it's a huge, huge savings. You can get two people for the price of one. Now, that said, the other benefit, I guess, is that when you're working remote, it's also very hard to distinguish work from non-work. So it's easy to see people working, 10, 12, 16 hours a day sometimes when they're working remote stuff. And that's because the work that you're doing isn't so much based on the amount of time that you're spending in the office. You're expected to just get the job done and do the things that you need to do, not so much sit there and be there. A lot of the time when people are in an office, they'll find that, hey, they count it as I went to work and did my job if they sat there and did 1 hour worth of work and screwed around on Facebook all day. Right? It's very easy to do when you have an in-person job. When you're working remote, it's almost always results driven, right? So if you're going to do your first remote position as a programming job, just make sure that it's something that you can accomplish. And if you're struggling with it and having a hard time, make sure that you're communicating that relatively early and getting help. Don't sit there and struggle and not get things done, and because then it's going to be harder to keep that job. But as long as you're getting things done and you have some proof that you can get things done working remote, I think that there's no reason you can't get your first programming job there. Like I said, I know quite a few guys who've done exactly that, and they just they're really good at what they do. They also, again, don't tend to just work like a very strict schedule, especially starting out. If you're starting out your first remote job, just expect that the amount of work that you do might be a bit more, but you're also going to be learning a lot more because it's not time spent at work, it's actually time working. You don't tend to just screw around on your remote position when you're working from home completely. Right? You're either working or you're not working, and you know when you're not working, and you don't count that. Let's go on to the next one. What does AAA stand for / mean? Why do we use this term? That's a good question. I don't remember anymore. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a really good question, though, and I feel like I should know the answer to that. Okay. Okay, so somebody wants to know the differences. I think the question here is about what the differences are between how a AAA versus indie project is structured, version controlled, and built. Um, that's interesting. Ideally, there shouldn't be any difference, right? The project should be in version control using whatever version control system you're using. Git's still my favorite, but use SVN or Perforce. Perforce is pretty popular in games still. Or even if you're using Unity Collaborate, you should be using some version control system, and you should be eventually using some build automation. What I found in smaller teams is that build automation tends to get delayed. It doesn't happen right away. But if you have people who are very used to doing build automation systems, then you might see that happen earlier too. But with a AAA company, you're almost always going to have a complete build pipeline so that you commit things and the build happens and it goes out and everybody gets access to it. And part of the reason there is that there are just a lot of other people out there that need to see it. And if you're sitting there wasting time building on your system, waiting for this big build process to go, and you're not doing other stuff, you're really just you're slowing down everybody else and you're slowing down yourself. Now, for project structure, I haven't seen too much of a difference other than in the bigger projects, the art is structured a little bit differently just because the art team will have their own kind of setup for how they like to do things. And a lot of time they'll have their own version control system for it too. And then they'll take the final things out of there and put them into the actual game project version control system. All right, let's go on to the next one. Let me take a drink first and ask for more likes, see if we can get up to 100 yet. We're still at 81, so see if I can get more while I take a sip. Oh, already answered that one. Let's see. And answered that one. And that one. All right, next one up. Would you use singletons for a camera controller? It depends on the game. So depending on what type of game you're building, a singleton could be totally fine for your camera controller. And this is just like having a singleton reference to the main camera controller. It's kind of like having camera.main, but without that slow tag lookup, which by the way, if you don't know, if you're using camera.main, it does a search by tag and it's slow and you don't want to be doing that. You want to cache that somewhere. A singleton is an okay use for that. If the thing is bigger though, and you might switch cameras or switch camera modes, I wouldn't necessarily go with a singleton just for the single camera controller, but you might have just a singleton instance that has a camera or a set of camera controllers or a camera control system that it's controlling and swapping in which camera controller you're using. But I think it depends a lot on just the specific project there. What do you think about Unity mirror networking? It's not something that I've used yet. That's something that I want to talk about with Kyle, though. So, like I said before, we'll be doing a live stream talking about just high performance networking in Unity, hopefully in the next couple days. So, if you guys are interested in that, dude, leave a comment down there in the bottom so that Kyle sees them all and he's more excited and motivated to want to jump on it quicker. So, anybody who's interested in networking, just say, hey, Kyle, come talk networking with us, and he'll explain. He knows all about all of the different networking systems, and he's just amazing at making stuff fast and clean when it comes to networking. So I don't know a whole lot about Mirror myself. He does, and I think it'll be a really interesting chat. So again, if you guys want to know about networking stuff, please just drop a comment down there, and we'll talk all about it. We're going to go in depth on how to make it fast, how to make it right, and how to do it with no garbage allocation, and all of the cool little tricks that I think are really important to make a high-speed, high-performance networked game. So again, just remember, drop a comment down there and hit like so more people come and drop more comments down there about it, and we'll talk all about networking in depth. All right, let's go on to the next one. Oh, this is another one about networking stuff. Again, drop a comment, and Kyle will talk about all about it. And if comments are not enabled, that's a problem. Did somebody say comments weren't enabled? Let me check that. Edit. I don't know. Comments should be enabled. Hopefully. I'm not sure. If not, then as soon as it ends, just go drop a comment and they'll be up there. Okay. So, I answered this one already about UI stuff. How do you go about adding mod support? Asset bundles, and now with the addressable system is a good way to do it. So you can set up code and bundles of stuff that Unity can load in where they can do different mods, either changing out data, and it depends on what kind of modding you want. If you want to allow them to control the code and stuff, you can even do that in there. You can let them create bundles that they can pull in and modify stuff. I want to do a full video on mod support though, and go into a couple different ways that you can do it, because there's a lot of options. There's some really simple things where you can just do data driven stuff and let players just change data in simple ways to mod stuff, or even have in-game support for it. So I think I'll do a full video about that sometime soon. But asset bundles and now with addressables is a good place to look to start. Okay, I started with Unity, then went to Unreal 4, then back to Unity, then back to Unreal 4. I know both really good. Love Unity more, though, but coding is my weakness. Blueprints in UE4 is why I keep coming back. How close is a native blueprint system for Unity? I'm not sure, but I heard that 2020 is when the visual scripting system for Unity is coming. I don't know how good that's going to be compared to the existing visual scripting systems that are available, like Playmaker and Bolt. But I anticipate that over the next year or so, it'll probably become pretty powerful and maybe become a default node-based coding system for it. So, yeah, I don't know exactly on a timeline or anything. I don't have any secret info on that, but I know that it is coming. And if you're really interested in that kind of stuff, I would go check out Bolt, because it's a nice visual scripting system that I've used before and it worked really well. And it was pretty easy to get started with. But again, I do most of my code just in raw code. I don't really like using visual editors just because I find that it gets a little bit more confusing as the projects get bigger and harder. But when for simple stuff, it works okay. Or things where things aren't too complicated, it works okay. I mean, you can definitely build out a full complex game in Blueprints. It's just I find it really hard to manage mentally when I'm looking through them compared to looking at code. That's probably just a bias of mine, though, because I've been doing code for so long. What's the best design patterns to follow in a small mobile game? Same as Angry Bird / Candy Crush, which contains a lot of levels and UI maps. I don't know about design patterns specifically there, but definitely editor stuff. You want to, for something like a Candy Crush, you want to give yourself good editor tools so that it's easy for you to create and test those maps. And I think that's kind of the core thing that I would look at first. I don't know about, like, for design patterns, it really comes down to individual specific problems. There's not like a big overarching design pattern that you would use for either of those. It's more just when it comes to building out the individual systems and the individual interactions. But when you're building a game, especially like Candy Crush, any of those match games, you want to have a lot of levels and maps, you want to build in some good custom editor support so that it's easy for you to create levels, easy for you to create maps, and then easy for you to test them as well, so that you're not having to go through and manually put this stuff in. You don't want to be putting stuff into like a text file and then importing that in. Just make an editor in game where you can just auto-generate and then change things on the fly really quickly and easily so that you can iterate as fast as possible. All right, what do we got next? How do you apply for studios when you're sitting in a third world country? That's a tough one. I've never done it myself, but I would say you probably want to look for remote positions, unless you're applying for somewhere that's got an easy system to get over there and start working in the studio. I know in the U.S. it's relatively hard to get people on visas working, especially moving them in. But working remotely as a contractor is dramatically easier. So if you can find remote contract positions, it's a good way to get started and then build up some of that experience. Without a good enough portfolio, it'd be pretty hard to get a full-time job through a visa, I think, in the U.S. But I said I've never actually had to go through that process, so I'm not really sure. But I would say you definitely can look at contract positions and remote positions, especially those remote contract ones, because they tend to be way less strict on the requirements. They just put you in as I'm not sure what the exact legal setup is for that, but contracting outside is relatively easy compared. Also, I've never worked on one of these sites, but we've hired people on sites like Upwork, where they kind of handle a lot of that for you. And we've hired developers from all around the world to do game stuff and work on projects through there because they handle it and make it a little bit easier. And I don't know how many positions are on there, but there are usually at least some positions on there that you can go in and apply for and at least get contract work and get the experience and then maybe convert those into full-time positions. But yeah, I wish I had better advice on that. Hopefully, maybe somebody in chat has some advice on this too, because it's just not something that I've had to deal with. Being in the U.S., it's been just kind of made it a lot easier, to be honest. Let's see what else we have. Answered that one. How do you find the individual workloads in indie versus AAA games? Which do you prefer? I find that in indie game development, the workload is definitely higher. There's a lot more to do. There's a lot of opportunity to just find tasks to do. There's never a time when there's not something to do. In AAA games, sometimes you'll finish up what you're doing, and then there's a little bit of downtime between like when you finish this task and when the next task is ready for you to start working on it. Maybe the designers are figuring out what that's going to look like, how it's going to go, and setting up some design docs. The producers are planning things out. When you're doing it in indie side, that's just never the case. But when you get to that downtime in AAA games, what I'd like to do is just jump into bug fixing, and that's usually what I see people do. Like, hey, I'm done with all my tasks. I got nothing else to do. I'm just gonna go through this bug queue and see what I can find and what I can fix. Usually, there's some stuff in there that's low priority, and you just kind of go hit that stuff. So the workload in India is definitely bigger and heavier, and I think I generally prefer it. I like to always have something to do that's important, but it's fun either way. Okay, this one says, "Hey Jason, love your videos. Since your YouTube channel is one of the best when it comes to Unity development, thanks. I like to ask what tips you have for aspiring content creators on Unity development. Also, what would be important to you if somebody wants to do a collaboration with you? Thanks." Um, I would say a couple things are important. One is decent editing for audio quality. One of the things I think I failed on horribly at the beginning was audio quality. It was really bad. There were a lot of times when things just were spiky, sounded tinny and terrible. And you could have like the best content and the best advice on how to do something, but if it's really irritating to the ears to hear it, it's bad. So I'd say invest in a good microphone and just a good system for that. Also, a decent camera if you're going to be on screen, and then some editing tools. When I do my own stuff, I like to just use Camtasia because it gives me little cursor call outs and stuff and makes it nice and easy. For the other videos, though, I have somebody edit my videos now, which helps a bit too. But when it comes to picking what types of content to build, I'd say look at what's missing and what kinds of things people are asking that aren't getting answers, and don't focus too much on really small little topics that only a dozen people in the world are going to care about, because it's going to be hard to get it out there and hard to have people watch it if there's only a couple things, there's only a couple people that have this problem. Yeah, don't do that. And also just do it right away. Like, don't wait. Don't sit around and go, hey, I'll start doing content stuff when this happens, or I'll start next year when I'm a little bit better, or when I have this thing. Just start right away and just keep going, and you're going to get better. If you look back at my first stuff, it's I'd say terrible, and you only get better by working on stuff and practicing. So I'd say just get to it as quick as possible, and if you want to collaborate on something, just shoot me an email. What does your daily schedule look like? When do you wake up, work, train, etc.? I get up whenever my wife wakes up, which is usually around like 7-ish. Sometimes I can sleep past that. And then I take a shower and start answering emails first usually. So most of the time that's the first thing I'll do. I'll either answer emails or play a quick game to wake up. And then start recording. I try to do the most important stuff early in the morning. So I start recording any course-related videos or any YouTube videos that I've planned out. A lot of time what I'll do is I'll plan out the video the night before. I'll go through, practice it, figure out what I want to do in there, get all the code right and ready. And then in the morning when I'm nice and fresh and I don't have bags under my eyes and I can talk and still have a voice, that's when I get to recording. And then after that, I'll get into coding. So that's when I start to do the bigger code projects, working on just the actual games that I'm working on. And then, yeah, from there, since I work remote and from home all the time now, it just kind of, that's the everyday schedule, though. It's not like there's a specific days or anything. Do it pretty much 7 days a week. And if I feel like I need to take a day off or need to take a break, I just go take a day off or take a break and go do whatever. Answered that one already. Would you consider itch.io account with prototypes a good portfolio when applying as a game developer? Thank you for your hard work on this channel. So I would say hosting your games on itch.io is good. Having it just be your entire portfolio, I wouldn't do. I would say just put together a simple web page. You can get a web host for $5 a year. Set something up where you're embedding those game prototypes either from itch or I still like to use Rocco's simmer.io, and embed those into your portfolio and make it more about you and featuring and focusing on your stuff. You don't want anybody else's stuff showing up there. You don't want any confusion there either about like what's yours and what somebody else's. So if you can just get it in there and really focus on one or two main things. Don't have like a dozen things in there that people have to figure out which one is the one to play. Put your best thing first and make sure that people are playing that and checking that out. Because if you have 5 games in there and they pick one randomly and it's not the good one, you're just kind of disqualifying yourself unintentionally or making it harder for yourself. If people don't like the first one, they may not even go to the second one. So make sure that the best one is the first thing people see and they get in and play it right away. I would say, yeah, definitely put it on your own page and make sure that it's focused about you, and maybe even have a little tiny blurb about what the game is. But I wouldn't write a bunch either, because you don't want people to have to try to read all of that and understand it. You want the game to really speak for itself, or the prototype to speak for itself. Let's see, what else we got here? While contracting out as a programmer, have you ever had to break out of a bad/unfair contract because the project lied about the scope or the work? How do you do that? That's a tough one. I've never had to really break out of a contract because it was like that, but I have seen a lot of contract positions where the scope isn't clear or where they dramatically underestimate the scope. And I try to figure that out before even taking the thing on. Figure out exactly what you're going to do and spell that out in the contract very explicitly. Say like, these are the things, these are the features, these are the exact features, and that's it. And then a lot of the time what I'll do too, or when I was doing a lot of contracting, is people would give me their big giant wish list and I would give them 2 or 3 different options for things that we could do. We could say, hey, at this rate we can do these 2 or 3 things, and then we go up to this rate we can hit these 5, and if you want these it's going to be this much. And spell it out really clearly on what you're going to do. Don't take a contract necessarily, unless you're really desperate, don't take a contract that's a full scope project without knowing and spelling out exactly what's in there, because people always have stuff in their head. People always have these ideas in their head that they don't communicate, and they just sometimes unintentionally assume that you're going to know what they're thinking, and assume that you're going to realize that this one little line is actually like a 3-month thing that you have to build out. So you want to spell out exactly what you're doing in there before that. If you're in that situation though, I don't know a good way around it. Generally when I do contract stuff too, I like to just scope out the entire thing at a set price and figure that out so that it's not hourly, because I just never been a big fan of long-term hourly contracting. Just don't like it generally. I like to figure out like exactly what they want built and a price that I think is fair for that, and then go from that. And then I've got it really spelled out. I don't know if you have to break out of a contract though because of the project scope being wrong. That sounds unfun. If I make a diagram of how my classes are organized, are you interested in making an architecture review instead of a code review? Sure. Make the diagram, send it over an email. Love to check it out. What should be the self-budget, expectation of funding budget, and realistic time frame for a full prototype and a full game if I want to make a big PC open world game in Unity? That depends a lot on your experience making those kinds of games. If you've never made a big open world game, expect it to take a very long time. And the funding depends on how much of that you're going to be building yourself versus paying other people to do. Um, yeah, that's, I guess, a little bit too generic for me to give a really good estimate, but big open world games tend to take a long time and be pretty expensive because it usually means there's a lot of content, a lot of art in there, and then a lot of technical problems. When you say big and open world, it generally means there's a lot going on, a lot of problems that you have to solve. Um, and yeah, without the experience level, it's really hard to just kind of guess. But I would expect a lot of time or a lot of money. That's usually the case for most big games. It's either going to take you a ton of time or a ton of money, and you have to figure out where the balance is in between those. Money just speeds things up, doesn't really necessarily do anything else. Just makes it go faster because you can hire more people, and it doesn't scale completely, right? Adding on, $100 million doesn't necessarily mean that your project's going to go any faster than $50 million. Just because you're putting more people in, and every time you add a person, the average of everybody's speed slows down a little bit because you get the communication overhead and the all the other side effects that come with having a lot of people on a team. All right, any tips with dealing with burnout? Currently, I want to work, but just too tired with no motivation at all. Find something that you're really passionate about to work on. I mean, if you're not super passionate about your project and you're just not interested in your project, it may just not be the right project. But sometimes you just need a break too, and you just have to relax and take a pause and do something else for a little while. I've done that myself. Even just jumping back and forth between video game development and non-game development. I think I took maybe too many pauses doing that because I found that every time I did, I wanted to get back into game development. I felt like I get a little bit burned out on game dev and I'd go do something else, do some web stuff, have a lot of fun with it, and then start to quickly miss game development. So I don't know if I have any other really good tips other than just take care of yourself and don't focus too much on one thing and not spend time doing other things either. Like, also get other people in there. If you can work with other people who are also motivated, they can tend to help motivate you on what you're working on. Okay, is it possible to make a huge AAA quality game like GTA 5, Metro Exodus, or Witcher 3? Why do these developers make their own engines? I know it's a typical newbie question. It's not really a newbie question. It's a good question. So if you're asking if you can make those with Unity, yeah, you definitely could. There's nothing really stopping you, especially now. Unity is really, I'd say, one of the most advanced engines. It does all kinds of stuff. You can do a lot with Unity that you can't do with these custom engines. The reason that people make their own engines, though, especially when you're looking at these sequels, is that they've been working on these things since long before there were other options. If you look back 10 years ago, there weren't very many game engine options. You could get Unreal. It wasn't cheap, and it was built around making a first-person shooter. We built other games. Like Vanguard was built on Unreal, so you could build other types of games on it. But building your own engine made a lot of sense then because you could really customize it to do exactly what you wanted. Right? You could focus on, I need this specific thing. I need these big giant maps, or I need whatever type of functionality, and you could build that, or you could build your engine all around that game. Nowadays, I think that you just could. There's nothing really stopping you from just doing all of these things in something like Unreal or Unity. You just go in there and do it. But the companies that already exist that have been doing these things, they have pipelines around their engines. They have a lot of internal experience and expertise around their own engines, and their engines are built for exactly what they're making. If they're making a totally new type of game, they may switch to different engines. And I've seen that a lot too, where big companies, they make a new thing and they suddenly switch over to a different engine. So like I said, the main reason I think that people stick with them is just familiarity, and the company is already there. They have a pipeline. They know what it's going to take. They know what changes they want to make, and they have the people there who built the engine from scratch, that know the stuff really well and can make those changes. The downside, of course, if you're trying to go in and make your own engine from scratch right now, is that there's just a huge cost of building all that stuff up. Unless you have a very small, very specific thing that you want to build, making your own engine, well, it kind of distracts away from a lot of the game development side and making the game. So it's possible. I know some people do it. Some people really just love game engine building too. But personally, I'd rather just stick with one of the existing engines that has hundreds or thousands of developers working on the thing and gets constant updates and new features and functionality. But there are definitely reasons that people do that still on their own engines. By the way, again, if anybody has questions and you haven't asked them, don't forget the link is in the description. You can just go submit them on that form. I see chat going by, but I've never been able to keep up with it. So I'm just going through them and reading the questions out of the form, answering them as quick as I can. And also remember to hit like, subscribe, share, the bell thing, and all the other stuff while you're in there. Tell everybody to come join and watch and ask more questions. And right now I'm at question number 40 of 65. So I'll see if I can keep up, and I don't know how much longer I'll go. Starting to get low on energy and breath, but I'll go as long as I can. So how do you decide how many scenes I have to make a complete game? For example, if I want to make Metroidvania-like game, do I make several scenes for several area, or just make one scene in a big chunk area? Okay. I think I understand the game. So the idea. It's how to make like a big game with large scenes, and probably with, ideally you're wanting to not just load in between each scene. So there are a couple ways to do this. One of the coolest implementations of something like this that I saw was the Inside talk from Unite. The game is called Inside, and they talked about how they built their entire system out of scenes and prefabs that would load asynchronously as you went along the game. I think that that's a really cool system for like kind of high-end stuff. If you want to do something simple, I don't know exactly how I would recommend splitting them out, really. Like, it depends a lot on how big the game is going to be. You might want to just have multiple scenes loading, and then what you can do is load them asynchronously as people get closer to them. So like you're in scene 1 and scene 2 is loaded, and scene 2 is this area over here, and it's loaded asynchronously. Once you get into scene 2, scene 3 can start loading asynchronously and getting ready. Depending on if you're going back and forth, you may have to manage that a bit better. Like I said, the Inside demo shows like the best and most advanced way I've seen to do it, and a lot of that is based around loading things slowly and asynchronously so that you're not dipping in frame rate, and it depends a lot on your specific requirements too. But I wouldn't necessarily make like one giant scene, because then you have slow loading times. Splitting things into smaller chunks is definitely better most of the time. Let's see what else we got here. Ooh, this is a long one. Okay, let me take another drink before I read this one. All right. Ooh. All right. So he says, I've been taking game dev and computer science courses at community college for a year now, and the sizable extra time I spend outside of class learning Unity and programming has caused me to be pretty far ahead of the curve. That I'm not surprised by at all. My recent final project was a networked card game using Photon Pun 2. I hadn't had any prior networking experience 3 months ago, and since then I researched a lot to keep workflows and project documentation that made it easy to work with another high-achieving programmer. That's awesome. We did excellent on the project, but it pretty much cemented my remaining GD courses weren't going to be teaching me much that I couldn't learn independently. I ultimately want to produce games and currently have a knack for programming. Should I go for general computer science degree while developing my project management and game dev skills on the side? Or should I go ahead for a game dev associate and then the industry sooner as my enter the industry sooner as my teacher earnestly says I'm ambitious enough and cut out for it? That's a tough one. I don't know exactly like I never really feel comfortable telling people not to learn stuff. I think in general, a general CS degree is going to be a little bit more valuable outside of game development. Neither one of them tends to be super valuable when it comes to getting a game dev career. Most of the time, people just care about what you can do. People care a lot more about your portfolio and the kind of work that you can do. And most of the time, the college classes tend to be very, very slow. They don't. They tend to teach to the median student there, not the high achieving students, or even a lot of times trying to keep it so that the lowest level student can keep up and can learn and stay up to date. They don't tend to go very fast, and I think if you're that far ahead, I would maybe even start just looking for jobs now. Like start trying to find jobs. Like as much as learning is important, I think that learning on the job is a great way to do it. And from the CS stuff, what you're really going to get, like the biggest things that people get out of CS degrees are the algorithms and data structures type stuff. That's, I'd say, the biggest benefit that you'll get there. Um, I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody just drop out and stop, but I would say start looking for jobs. And if you can get in somewhere and then you decide, hey, I'm learning more work and I don't necessarily need this, then make that decision on your own. But I wouldn't wait either. Like if you're doing that and it sounds like you figured out how to make a card game, figured out how to use networking stuff, and did it all on your own. It's the best kind of programming in my opinion, and that's where I'd say like a lot of the all-star programmers that I meet are. That's kind of where they've come from. They went. Some of them went and got a degree, but if you ask them like how much of what they do came from their degree, they're gonna say like maybe 1%. Right? Most of it is like the degree got them into the door somewhere sometimes, or a lot of times it did nothing for them. Like, I know a lot of people who got degrees and never used them. My degree I got is completely irrelevant to programming and game development. Doesn't help at all. Didn't matter at all. Never made a difference. It only makes a difference. The places where it tends to make a difference, at least in the U.S., are big giant corporations who have like these like generalized hiring systems. But even in the bigger tech companies, I don't think it's nearly as important anymore. People really care about what you can do and whether or not you can pass these coding tests, whether or not you can get the job done. So I'd say go out there and start looking for a job right away. Don't wait too long. Don't sit around and wait, and think like I have to go do this thing or I have to spend a bunch of money to get these jobs. If you can do the job, people will hire you. And like I said, when I look at resumes, I just skip right past the education part. I don't care at all because I've met way too many people who had a master's in computer science and couldn't write a line of code. I mean, it's happened dozens of times where I saw that, like people who just like, oh yeah, I got a master's in CS, and like they can't write a simple thing with a button that you can click on that pops up a window, like the simplest stuff. They couldn't even read the code. So it's, yeah, I just skip past it and I look straight for the portfolio and what they've actually done. Oh, is it important to get a computer science degree from a really good university to be a AAA game dev? I think I just kind of answered that. So I would say it's definitely not. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily hurt. There's not like a downside to it, but you can definitely it's not going to get you the job on its own either. Like, you have to know how to do the game dev stuff. You have to know how to code. You have to be good at it. Getting a degree and then going in with no experience, you're not going to get the job over somebody who doesn't have the degree and can actually write the code and make the games. By the way, again, anybody that's watching and catching up, if you're curious on how to ask questions, there's a form in the description. Just drop the question there, and I'm going through them one after another, just like this. Here, I'll show my desktop again real quick. So I'm just going through them, reading them off, answering them as quick as I can, trying to keep up. I don't know that I'll get through all of them, but I'm going to get through as many as I can, and I'll probably wrap this up in about another 40 minutes or so. So just ask your questions, hit the like button and the share button on your way in and out, or just do that even if you don't have a question, and I'll keep going, and we'll go through these as quick as possible. Be back on. Cool. It looks like we're back to streaming. Sorry, the stream just totally dropped out. That was my internet. I don't know what's going on. Everything in my house just dropped off the internet for a second and just popped back on. I just watched Google go, hey, I'm offline. I'm back online. Okay, cool. So, yeah, I'll reread the question. So it said, from your experience, what elements in the game benefit most from the Unity job system? I'm currently working on an RTS game. Um, so what I was mentioning is that the job system, what I've seen people use it for most recently is anything that's processing a lot of data and slow in your game. In an RTS, if you're doing something super scalable where you're having hundreds of thousands or thousands of units, it could be a really interesting way to do it. I don't generally do much with the job system yet. I'm still waiting on the ECS system to kind of get finalized, and I just haven't had a project where there were a lot of uses for it. It tends to be in some character controlling stuff or things where we have just a lot of objects that need to process some relatively complex data and need to read and write a lot of memory. But yeah, I don't know if I have a great example of it. I do think an RTS could be a really interesting use case for it, though, because the game flow and the way that the game works just kind of aligns well with the job system. Let me see, what else we got here? My code is very simplistic. How to make it more sophisticated. Now, I wouldn't say I would recommend aiming for sophisticated, because a lot of the time what happens is people go for sophisticated and it just ends up being more complicated and confusing. I'm going to switch back to camera mode. But what I would go for is trying to make it more clean and easier to follow. So if you're finding that your code is not easy to follow, or that you're having to scroll through and bounce around everywhere to try to figure out how things work, start with working on cleaning that up. The easiest thing to do is just name stuff well. I say easiest. It's hard to name things well, but the easiest thing to start with, naming things well, and then start to learn a little bit about design patterns, but don't try to shove them into everything that you're doing. Also, look into the solid principles. It's not an easy thing to just kind of make a giant shift and make all your code following these solid principles, but it's very easy to kind of get used to the idea of writing cleaner, easier to understand, easier to manage code if you start watching videos and talks about solid stuff. I've got a set of videos up, but I also recommend just go look at Uncle Bob's videos. They're great for that kind of stuff. I mean, one of the main guys around that stuff. So go look at videos on clean code and refactoring. And I think that that'll help a lot more. Don't try to make things overly complex, and don't try not to over engineer things. Try to keep them as simple as possible while working, but also clean and easy to understand. A big goal of mine is always making the code so that any developer can come in, read it, and understand what it's doing and not be confused. Now, sometimes I fail at that miserably, but when I do, I try to go back and just refactor it and change it. If I can't explain the code when I'm reading through it, then I feel like I need to refactor it and make it so that I can explain it, and I can explain to people exactly how the things work. So let's see. What other hard skills do you think are important for becoming a good Unity/general developer, except for knowing C# and software architecture? I would say render pipelines, networking, and creating tools. Anything else? Those are definitely good ones. So understanding the render pipeline is important. Networking can be important depending on the types of games that you're working. And tools creation, I think, is super important to save you a lot of time. I just had something else and I totally lost it. Understanding the animation system is another really big one. Understanding Mechanim, the character controller systems or the animation controller systems, and animation overrides, prefabs, and UI systems as well. I think those are all really important to understand and just get comfortable with, and understand how you can make things extensible, especially like in the animation system. I find a lot of time people do it the hard way and they make it a lot harder on themselves than they need to. They don't know about the overrides and everything else in there. So they just kind of going through all those things. And also the ones that you listed are great. Again, render pipelines, networking, and tools creation. Definitely important ones. Will you have cheaper courses on Udemy? Probably not on Udemy. I'll probably have some cheaper courses sometime in the future. I don't know. The ones I have right now are kind of expensive because they're just in depth and complicated. They take a lot of time. So Udemy, I know some people who have courses on there, but I don't know anybody who has Udemy courses who is happy about it. So that's one of the reasons I've been avoiding it. And I think it's mostly because they take like 90% of the money, which makes it kind of hard to sustain and keep working on and support. Okay, let's see. Is Unity a good choice for a UI-based, turn-based game? I'm starting Journey with Game Dev. Greetings, Paul. Yes, Paul. I would say it's a great option for that. The UI system is still somewhat new. It's not that new, though. There's definitely no reason that I would use any other engine for it, but I'm also very biased. I've been using Unity for a long time, and I love the engine. I'd say it's definitely a good option for that, though. If I was building a UI-based turn-based game, I would definitely be doing it in Unity. What do you think about starting Kickstarter campaign? When should you start doing it? So Kickstarter campaign, it's been a while since I worked on one. They're a ton of work. Getting it set up is a lot of work. Maintaining it and managing it is a lot of work. Don't expect it to be like a short-term thing. It's something that you've got to invest like months into doing to get it right and to get it funded. And it's probably just gotten harder. I mean, the last time I looked at this was like years ago, and it wasn't easy then. It was a lot of work then. I would say starting a Kickstarter campaign probably after you've already generated a lot of buzz on the game. So I'd get the game out there, let people see it, and let people know about it long before you get over to Kickstarter so that you have an easier time doing it, but also just be ready to spend a lot of energy and effort getting that thing right and getting it funded through there. So I'd say make sure you have a lot of people already lined up and already excited about the Kickstarter coming along before you do it. Is there a good guide on what skill level you should be at before looking for a game dev job? I'm self-taught in C#, MySQL, PHP, JavaScript, and can do small projects, but I'm not a pro by any means, and I'm worried about being out of depth. I would start right away. I think that a lot of the time people just wait and they get scared and they're worried that they're not qualified enough. And almost every time I've talked to people who thought they weren't qualified enough, they were more than qualified to get at least an entry-level programming job working on games. I know a lot of people go in, they know a little bit, they don't know a lot, and they learn a lot on the job. I think the willingness to learn and the kind of passion and excitement goes a lot further than people expect. So I'd say if you're not sure, you probably are fine. You probably should just go in there and start applying. Now, don't apply for senior jobs, obviously. Don't apply for something like you want to go be a senior dev on World of Warcraft, but go apply for all kinds of different stuff and go through the practice of interviewing, right? So if you're not sure, go out, apply go to some interviews, and if you don't get the jobs, ask them why, talk to them, and be friendly, and just explain your situation. And a lot of time, people will explain to you where you're lacking and things that you can study and get better at, and then just go in and start studying those things if you're not getting them. But I would say just get out there and try. I know way too many people who've sat around and just been afraid to apply because they might get rejected. But I mean, if you don't apply, you're not getting the job. If you apply and you don't get the job and they don't hire you, you're still not getting the job. You have nothing to lose by going out there and trying. So just get out there and start applying and start trying as early as possible. If you can make small projects, that's probably enough to get at least your first job, especially in smaller indie stuff. There are way more jobs out there for game developers than there are game developers available. How do you have to plan an indie game to complete the game instead of canceling it? That's a tough one. Scope is, I'd say, the most important thing. Figure out the scope of the game and get the core part done as quick as possible. Get the most important stuff done as quick as possible so that you're not struggling and you're not just not finishing things. Now, depending on the scope of the game, you may need to worry a lot about getting good architecture there. If the game is short and it's something that you're going to put together in 3 or 6 months, it's much less of an issue. But as projects get bigger and longer, it's very easy to mess things up and turn your code into a mess, make your project into a mess. So I'd say you need to worry about architecture and keeping things clean if it's going to get big. But if it's something small, just I I'm yeah, get the core stuff out and get it done as quick as possible. I'm trying to think of like how to plan it out. Now, when it comes to just actual planning, figure out, I guess, what those core systems are and set up, at least a list of all of the core things that you want to do. I mentioned earlier using something like Trello or a whiteboard with sticky notes and put all of your stuff in there and then move over the tasks that you're doing every week to make sure that you're staying on task and doing the right thing. It's really easy when you're working on an indie game to just kind of go down a little rabbit hole and start working on the wrong thing because it's shiny, it's new, it's interesting, or you just want to make this one thing a little bit better. And you really need to make sure that you're getting the core important stuff done. And that's generally where people fail. They'll plan something out and then they'll struggle with something and they'll sit and just keep working on this one little thing and never actually get to their game, or they'll get distracted. Instead of finishing their core game loop, they're adding achievements and adding all these other little systems because they heard that those were important. And really what's important is your core game loop being fun and being interesting and exciting enough to keep people interested in playing it. So get that part done and then work on the other things. Hope that helps a little bit. Is it possible to get a programmer remote job in the U.S. with 3 years of experience at UE citizen without a visa? As contractor, definitely. So getting a full-time remote job without a visa, I don't know that that's possible. But getting a contract job where you're working as an external contractor or you have your own company that you're contracting through is much, much easier. In fact, a lot of time for remote jobs, people prefer that because they don't want you to be a full-time employee because there are a lot of costs and rules and regulations that come with that. So if they can hire you through another company like Upwork, which like I said, I've never worked on Upwork, but I've hired people through there to work as programmers. That's definitely an easy way to go, or having your own company, just setting up whatever country you're in, setting up a company that that you can contract through so that they're paying your company and then you're paying yourself through your company. It's a whole lot easier than going through the visa process, at least from my understanding. Again, I've never had to do it. I've never had to hire anybody with a visa, but everybody I've talked to generally prefers for remote stuff to go through some sort of contracting system where it's not an actual full-time job, but you're still doing essentially the job of a full-time job just through another company. How are tasks broken down in AAA development? Oh, I actually talked about this a little bit in the beginning. Do designers submit a feature request and then one dev works on it for a month and is broken into several small tasks and shared by multiple devs? For example, an inventory system. So, an inventory system's a little bit bigger depending on the type of game. But generally what happens is the designers on a AAA project will come together and they will plan out what it is that they want in there. And then the lead designer will work with the producer and lead programmer, or producers and lead programmers, and they'll figure out with the order of when these things are going to happen. And sometimes designers will want things that they don't realize are kind of reliant on something else to be done right. So then that's where the lead programmer will come in and go, hey, well, we need to reorganize and reorient and do these things first. But then the lead designer or the lead programmer will usually figure out who they think on the team is best for the task, or they may talk with the entire team in a meeting or something, or individually, and figure out who's going to do the task. Sometimes it's a single person working on a thing. Sometimes it's two or more people working on a thing, pairing or mobbing or something. But a lot of the time, it'll just be a single person, and they'll get this task, and it's often broken into like a full month, or a lot of time it's like a 2-week sprint, and it'll be like, in these 2 weeks you're doing this thing, and it's totally like an arbitrary made up timeline that people use where they just pick like, hey, somehow things take 2 weeks. It's never accurate. But hold on one second, I gotta take this collar off. There we go. There's jingling all around my office. Okay, but yeah, that's generally, and I talked a bit about this in the beginning too. So if you're interested, just bounce back to the beginning when we're done. Also, get more likes in here would be awesome. If you guys don't mind, just hit the like button if you haven't hit it already. Hit the share and everything else while I'm taking a breath. Okay, Would a prototype with almost non-existent art but finished core gameplay be considered a good one for game designer slash gameplay programmer? Yes. Um, Most of the time when you're applying as a game programmer or game designer, people understand that you're not an artist and people aren't going to worry about the art quality. Now, it doesn't mean that you want to have like totally terrible art. Just find something that's okay and just explain to people that it's placeholder art. Or if you can make it very obvious that it's placeholder art that's not terrible, just put a little cell shading on or something. Do a little bit of work on the art, but not a lot. And that's generally more than enough. People, for the most part, understand that the game the gameplay and the design is not necessarily the art. Sometimes the game is all about art, but most of the time the game is not so much art, and the art comes later and the art gets swapped in constantly. So as long as you're not, applying to a single like owner that doesn't know anything about code that's running the place, you should be fine. Because yeah, that's it. All right, next up. What do you think about Unity's new editor UI design? I hated it for like 2 days and now I love it. So I was struggled with it for a second. I was like, I don't like this at all. It's totally different. Everybody move my cheese. It's all weird. Now I'm totally used to it. It didn't take long at all. I think it's overall probably a good move and it's a good upgrade. So I'm happy with it. Okay, I'm starting to learn programming, and my goal is to develop games. What should I focus on? What language? And what advice may you share for beginners? I would personally recommend just doing C# in Unity. The other option, of course, is going with C++ and going into Unreal. I would say definitely go with one of those two. Don't pick anything else for your starting point because those are the two where all of the jobs are. I think there are more jobs for Unity development, especially in the indie side, and it's quite a bit easier to get into there when you get into Unreal. There are definitely jobs out there, a lot of AAA jobs out there. But if you're just trying to start out and you really want to get in with C# and Unreal first. It's a bit more C# and Unity. Sorry, it's a bit more approachable, and there are just a lot of positions out there, and there are also just a lot of non-game positions out there using the same stuff. So even if you have a hard time finding game positions, C# in general is applicable all across programming. You can do web stuff, enterprise stuff, and everything else. But you can also do all kinds of things in Unity with C# that are not game related too. But if you want to get into games, that's where I would recommend. But I mean, also again, I'm very biased on it. I love the engine. Been talking about it forever. That's basically what my whole channel is about. So, take that for what it is. How to grow a beard like yours? I just don't shave. It's literally just like I forget to shave. I hate shaving. And when I do shave, I just use the clippers, cut them down. That's it. I don't know. Drink a lot of milk. How do you go about learning about building tools for Unity? I feel like there's almost no good material on tool building. That is true. I actually learned most of mine from trial and error. It was a lot of, we need this, we need to figure out a way to do it, and just go in there and dig in. I don't know that there are any really great resources for building tools for Unity stuff, or even outside of Unity stuff. A lot of the things that are built tool-wise for games are not even in the engine. Like I'd say it's kind of 50-50. Some of it's in-engine stuff that I'm building, like editor extensions, editor tools, build tools, stuff like that. And then a lot of it's also just outside the engine using even things like web frameworks or WPF recently, which I just kind of already had some experience in, to build things that interact with data. So when you're building a lot of heavily data-driven games, a lot of the time building the things in the engine isn't the best because you're recreating a lot of functionality that exists outside of places. Like you want to have searching, filtering, sorting, grid editing, and all that stuff. Putting those things into the engine tends to not be nearly as easy. So it's about 50-50 there, but I don't know of any really great resources for building tools. It's all just been trial and error and basically having a need and then figuring out how to solve that just by messing around and figuring it out. Can you make a video about folder structure? Sure. Best way is to name folders and don't mix everything up in the process. When a project gets bigger, it becomes hard to find what I'm trying to find. Yeah, there are a couple different approaches to this. I think that'd be an interesting video though. Just talk about a couple different ways to do it. Don't have a pin, so leave a comment on the bottom of the video too, so I don't forget. But I'll try to remember to get one of those done soon, and just talk about a couple different ways to do it. Yeah. What's the best way to go about using webcam input as the controller in Unity? I'm not sure. That's not something I've had to do. Last time I wanted to use a camera as a controller, I was actually using a Kinect, which was a lot of fun. We set up Kinects, and it was a VR game where you're playing like Avatar, like the show, not the movie, but you're doing special moves and you're in VR using Kinects to throw fireballs at each other and block and do other kinds of cool moves. It was a lot of fun because it just tracked your skeleton relatively easily, and it tracked gestures and stuff. Now I know you can do a lot of that with webcams now with I think with OpenCV, but I haven't had to use it personally. So I would check out some of those plugins and see how well they work with that, but I'm not sure what the best options are now. I think Kinects are kind of dead. I have like a drawer full of them and haven't pulled them out in years. Okay, Stardew Valley and Forager are both good examples of indie games. What software is good to start studying and making an indie game as a newbie like me? I'm using Game Maker Studio at the moment. Yeah, I think Game Maker is pretty cool for starting out, especially if you want to be a game designer. If your core goal is doing game design, it's a great way to get in there and just start designing actual games and not having to worry about the coding. If you want to do code stuff, I would jump into Unity and just start learning that, because you're not going to, at least from what I remember of Game Maker, you're not going to learn much about the programming pipeline type stuff. But in Unity, you're kind of forced to do all of that. So it's a big jump and a big change, but it depends a lot on what you want to do. So if you want to do programming, I'd jump over to Unity and start making things. Just expect that it's going to take longer to make the same kind of things that you make in Game Maker, but you're going to have more flexibility in the long run and be able to make more types of things. But if you want to do design, Game Maker is a great option to just get started in there, and you can make things that you can show off, and it's probably a good way to get in with a portfolio of stuff or get a game out there that people can play. Okay, we can't create AAA games alone, and for indie developer, every idea we think of has already been made, especially about hyper-casual games. It would be copy and repetitive. How can we get fresh ideas for a game? I have no idea. I'm terrible at coming up with game design. I think game programming and game design are definitely very different skill sets. The game designers I know that are good are generally not programmers, and the programmers I know, almost all of them don't think of themselves as good game designers. They may have good game design ideas, like things that would fit well into a game that they think would be neat, but they don't generally do great on the designing their own game. There's some people out there that are amazing at both, but most of us are good at one or the other. And coming up with fresh game ideas is not something I would say I'm good at. There are a lot of books out there, though, on how to come up with them. Art of Game Design is one of them, sitting right back there. So maybe go through a bunch of game design books and try to get some ideas. A lot of the time, people who are good at game design also don't just work on video game design. They'll work on card games, board games, physical stuff to get used to the process of figuring out what's fun. There is a really good podcast, though, Game Design Zen. Curtis did it. I don't think he's still recording them, but he's got a good number of episodes where he just talks about game design and how to make games interesting and fun. And I'd say he's one of those guys that's good at both. I'm definitely not. Right? He's a programmer who can also design well. I'm a programmer who cannot design well. Okay, no Unity versus Unreal War, but do indies tend to pick the engine for use based on type of game, or do they mostly stay loyal to their tools even though they are just tools? I learned Maya a long time ago and I still use it because I've not had a reason to learn any other 3D package. But I'm willing to if the industry moves forward and fast enough with workflow and pipelines. Your thoughts? Because you can code any engine but choose C#. So in my experience, people tend to get used to things and they stick with them because they become very proficient in them. For example, if I jumped back over to Unreal, which I haven't used professionally in many years, I would not feel proficient and I would feel very slow in it. It would take me a lot longer to accomplish the same tasks. And I think that that's the case for anyone. There are some reasons, like specific game types, that you might want to make a jump, or if you want to join a project in a team that's working in a specific tool set, you might have to make that jump. But a lot of the time, what happens is people tend to get really good at what they're used to, and then they stick with it because they're good at it. Which sounds like kind of like what you're doing there with Maya. You've gotten really good with Maya, and you've never really had a reason to switch. So I think until there's an external motivator, most people don't switch. They get good with something and then they stick with it. For me, the switch was a completely an external motivator. I needed I knew Unreal. I could make games in Unreal, but at the time we couldn't get a license for Unreal, and it didn't have deployment to the platforms that we wanted back then. Now, of course, you can go to wherever you want and you can get into it for free. When I did this switch, it was literally just because of that. Had that not been the case, this video would be about Unreal right now, right? Like if that had been an option for our mobile game when mobile first came out, you'd have gone straight to that. Now, don't get me wrong, it didn't take them long to catch up. By the time we released, Unreal was able to do the same things. But when we started off, it just wasn't an option. So we had the external motivator to switch, and that's kind of what drove it. And I find that that's the case for a lot of people. Without the external motivator, people stick with what they're good at. All right, I'm going to try to go faster because I'm going to go in about 10 minutes. So I got a couple more questions. By the way, let's see if we can get up to 200 likes before the end of this. It's only like not that many more. The numbers going up. Let's see. I really like the video explaining inversion of control with simple example about spells in a spell processor. Would you consider making more of these design pattern, clean code, plus simple practical example type videos? Definitely. Those are my favorite kind to do. So I think I want to do some more that go over some of the same types of patterns with different examples and just better editing and better examples and better explanations of these things. I'll probably end up redoing the entire Solid series and a couple new beginner videos sometime soon where we'll go over some real world examples of how to use different design patterns in games that I've built and see what types of code I can pull out. Also, one thing that I think is going to happen soon is we may start live streaming some actual AAA MMO development where you'll be able to see the code while we're writing it and while we're making decisions and refactoring and changing things up. I have a meeting about that tomorrow to figure out what that's going to look like, for sure if it's going to happen or not, and when we'll get started on that. So keep an eye out for that. I think that'll be a lot of fun and hopefully really valuable to people because they can see some of these patterns in real world scenarios and what they look like for really code that needs to be super scalable. Do you have experience with the Unity job system or other ways of multi-threading? For what elements would you implement multi-threading? I already answered this one a little bit back, so I don't want to talk about it again because I got so many to go through. But usually a job system I use for things where we need to do a lot of processing of the same type of data, and it's very rare, very, very limited use so far. I haven't run into many scenarios with it, and it's mostly just kind of projects I'm working on and the state of things right now. I left a comment on a 2-year-old video already, but is there a solid way to move a cursor in Unity? And I'm able to make a virtual cursor that can click on UI buttons. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Can you just send me an email about that? Sometimes I get a lot of comments on old videos and I just miss them. And I couldn't keep up with all of them. But just send me an email and I will check that out. It's just my name at unity3d.college. I'll send it right over to me. Sorry for so many questions, but I like your insight. Will there be a day when a small team can make AAA games in less time? I'm sure there will be. I ask so because tools like Houdini are making life so much easier and faster. Houdini is hard, but not so is 3D. After a while, it's not. Yeah, I think so. I mean, eventually, ideally, we get to like a Star Trek level where you just walk in and you tell the tell the system whatever you want. To say, hey, make me this game, and you walk in and you're in the the holodeck, right? And it's just your game there. So I can't imagine that unless humanity falls apart or something, that we won't eventually get there. And things have gotten dramatically easier over just while I've been a programmer. So I can't imagine it's not going to get even easier. If I'm creating a game for WebGL canvas based in JS/WebAssembly, would you recommend building your own engine? Nope. If so, what engine would you use as an example to work from? I would say to build in Unity with the WebGL. Rocco on Simmer.io has some good examples of how to hook everything together and make it nice and clean. But they've also put a lot of stuff into the engine to just make that a lot simpler too, to build out those games and deploy them. Let's see, next up. Is it worth it for a new person to get into programming to learn ECS or stick with standard Unity C# information? I want to get back into game development as a hobby after being out of using C# for a few years. I would not go for ECS yet. In the future, probably, but maybe not for at least a year. Don't start with it as your first jump back into game development or Unity stuff. It's changing constantly. A lot of the documentation and tutorials out there are already outdated, and they get outdated constantly. It's changing very rapidly, and most people I know are not using it right now to code their games. They're using the standard stuff. Every game that's been built in Unity so far is built on the standard stuff. Stick with that. That said, of course, ECS in the future could be a great thing, but let's just wait and see. Just not as a getting back in thing. Okay, hi, I'm doing a simple starting game in Unity as a side project during holidays in order to show that I've made some things on my own. That's a good idea. I breezed through the programming part because I'm used to coding, but the game still looks poor and has no models and animations besides basic Unity cubes. Is it fair to ask a 3D modeling animation student to work on it without pay? I have no money, and my skills on the game are in coding and math, so it'd be helpful and useful for the student. The game is a simple spaceship game with weird physics and mechanics. It has a simple spaceship for the player and around 20 enemy types that should have animations for every interaction. I would cut the scope first. Don't expect somebody to make 20 things with 6 different animations on it. Cut the scope dramatically, and then you could probably find an artist to do it. I wouldn't count on that though, because when you're getting people to do free volunteer stuff, you cannot hold them accountable. And if you don't get along well, just expect things to fall apart. Don't expect the quality to be great. Another option is just looking for free art and assets on the asset store. There's quite a bit of that out there. You can also just reach out to artists on the asset store and explain the situation. A lot of the time, they'll be willing to just hook you up with free copies of their stuff. But there's no reason you couldn't get an artist to do it. Just you got to make sure that it's the right artist and you guys get along. And I would say don't try to overload and overwhelm them with stuff, because your interest in the project is going to be 5 to 10 times more than their interest in the project. You designed it, you started the thing, and you're just asking them to help join you for free. It's going to be hard to keep them on task a lot of the time unless you find the perfect person. So I'd say definitely give it a try. There are probably artists who are interested in it. Don't try to talk them into it. Find somebody who's really interested in it, and don't try to kind of convert or convince them to do it. By the way, we're only 7 likes away from 200 and 3 minutes away from 3 o'clock. I'm trying to get through these questions as quick as possible. I'm currently at uni for game design, and I don't feel like I'm learning anything. Are there good sources for learning the nuances of design? Yes, there are lots of good books and videos out there. Grab Art of Game Design is a good one. Got that. I would say go through the books. You may end up learning a lot more from the books than anything else. And like I've mentioned before, I've never known anybody who was hired to be a game designer because they went to game design school. And I've never talked to a game designer who thought that was a great path for doing stuff. Game programming tends to be a little bit different because programming is pretty general and you can learn the stuff everywhere. I take it back. I know at least one guy who went to game design school, really loved it, and had really good feedback on it. But it was a very specific one with that guy teaching the course. So yeah, it was the guy who wrote the book there teaching the courses. So I'd say, get books. You can learn a lot from it. Get practice. I don't know, school, a lot of it is about making money. It's not so much about, I don't want to bash it too much. I'm going to go on. How would you implement character states in ECS? I wouldn't right now. I would skip that. And it's been too long since I played with ECS to know. I'm going to do some more ECS stuff early 2020, but not anytime in the next month or two. I'm a web dev with experience in JavaScript and PHP. I love the idea of working on a game. Do you think it's worth trying to go into Unity game dev as a junior or just stay a web dev? I personally way prefer working on game dev. I know some people who just really like web stuff, but in my opinion, like working on games is just a ton more fun because you get to see people look at your game, and it's just sorry, somebody's asking my email. It's Jason at unity3d.college. That's the email address. Um, but yeah, working on games is just a lot more fun. You get to show it to people, people get excited, you get to have a lot of fun with it, and you get to experiment. And I would say definitely I would say go for it. Yeah, go for it. Get in, get a little practice first. Don't just go try to apply with zero experience because you're going to need to understand C sharp. You're going to need to understand the language a bit. Just do a couple little courses, prototypes, and then get out there and start applying right away. Because the programming side is going to translate relatively quick. It should be easy to understand. A lot of the patterns are the same. There are some nuances and differences, like you're handling updates and collisions, and you're handling the loop that's kind of hidden in web dev manually, which it has some positives and negatives. But once you get used to it, it's not any more difficult, and it's a lot more fun, I think. And I've done both a lot, and I definitely would say I prefer game dev over anything else. Is it better to learn other languages in case the company you want to work for is using that language? No. I mean, usually with a game company, they're either using C++ or C sharp. It's very rare that they're going to be using anything else. If they are using anything else, it's probably some little tertiary app that's running some stupid Perl script or something else that in the back. Maybe a little bit of SQL if you want to work on data-driven games. But other than that, I would say no. Just pick the language that you guys are working with and learn that. For Unity stuff, it's C sharp. For Unreal stuff, it's C++. And learn it with the engines. Don't try to go learn it outside the engine and then apply it because the patterns are very different when you get into the game engines. A lot of the stuff is very similar, but the way that you interact with the language is quite a bit different when you go into game engines. I was wondering what the most requested specializations are to engage in programming in AAA industry. I'm often busy with graphics programming, like DirectX stuff. So when it comes to specializations, they tend to be um, graphics work. So exactly what you're talking about, like shader writing and graphics programming, or networking for certain types of games. Network specialization is pretty important. And then the rest of it tends to be gameplay stuff where you're working on client and server gameplay code. There's a little bit of specialization in data side too, depending on the game type. If it's like an MMO, you're going to have a good amount of data requirements there. Or if it's some kind of game that's just heavily data driven where you're saving a lot of data off, it can be a decent specialty. But most of the time, most of the programmers are just more generalized gameplay programmers who have some graphics programming skill, some network programming skill, but they're primarily focused on gameplay, code architecture, and adding features and functionality to the game. How do you approach the task of aligning an indie team around a game, especially when development has been going on for a while? The artist might want to go in one direction of a dark RPG, taking risks, experimenting with weirdness, while the game designer prefers cleaner, more sober style, going for a low risk and not to alienate people. That is a hard problem, I'd say probably outside of my skill set, where you're really dealing with managing people there and managing expectations. And it can go really wrong really fast if you have multiple people on the team building different games. I've seen it happen a lot where games kind of fall apart because one person's building this thing, another person's building something completely different. And whenever they have the opportunity to build the thing that they want that's a little bit different, that's where they go. And they don't end up working on the same thing together. The best advice I can give, and I don't know that it's great advice, is having them work together live as much as possible. Have the artist and the designer working together. But it's kind of hard with artists too. They tend to go off and just do their own thing. I wish I had better advice there, but that's definitely more of a people management problem than anything. And I'd say address it quickly because you don't want it going for too long because you're just going to end up burning a lot of time and energy and you'll end up with the worst, right? Instead of getting like the best of both, you'll get the worst of both because it's not going to mesh together and it's going to be scary. What audio solution would you use for Unity games? Inbuilt, Fmod, WWise, or other? I don't know. For a lot of stuff I just use all the default stuff. I think it depends on the game specifically, and I'm certainly not an audio engineer. Be honest, I think most of us kind of ignore audio until the last second and kind of forget about it. It's not something that crosses my mind enough to give a really good, thoughtful answer to. Sorry. What are good websites to sell a full course? Sites like Udemy or Skillshare. Also, can you sell the same course on multiple platforms? I don't know. I know a lot of people use Teachable. Udemy, I've heard bad things about, mostly just on their cost structure. People. I talked to developers who had thousands of people in their course and had made less than $1,000, right? Like where they were getting less than $1 per sign up because Udemy puts it on sale for $10 and then takes $9 out of it, and then they pay taxes on that last dollar, and they're making less than $1 a thing. Can you sell courses on multiple platforms? I don't see why you couldn't. I think that I don't know what the best options are. I personally just go with my own stuff so that I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to rely on anybody else. Just rely on keeping my own stuff steady and stable, and not have any external dependencies, which isn't too hard to do either. You can set up a WordPress site with LearnDash, and it'll let you set up all the course stuff. You have to kind of manage it and do it all yourself, but I think you have a little bit more control, and that's what I use on mine. I practically lived in Unity for the past year, and I'm starting on my first small demo for a portfolio project using Git, of course. Good. Do you think diversity of small, polished portfolio demos in a variety of genres, and especially throwing a demo made in another engine just to show the fact that you can adapt to software would be a good plan? I don't know that it would help too much. I mean, if people are hiring you for an Unreal job, they care about what you've built in Unreal. If they're hiring you for a Unity job, they care about what you've built in Unity. They're not going to care too much about what you've done in the other engine because it's hard for them to know whether or not those skills translate. If you're not sure what you're going to apply for, then maybe. But I would just say if you're working on Unity and you've built some demos in there, just get one really good one or two really good ones and use those as your portfolio focus. I wouldn't worry about spreading yourself too thin or trying to do too many things unless you plan to apply for those specific jobs. I'd say look at the jobs that you want and do the things in the stuff that they've asked for or that they're looking for. Did you try the new AI planner and ML agents? Not yet. What's your opinion about them? Don't have any yet. I plan to do it sometime soon. I played with ML agents. That's the machine learning stuff. I think it's really cool and interesting, but I just haven't had time to jump back into it lately. Hello, can you talk about how to approach architecture in the early planning stages, such as potential use cases for DLLs, scriptable objects, and or ECS? So I know some people who really love creating things into DLLs. I've never found a really good benefit from doing it, so I generally don't use that. Instead, what I look for are the script assemblies, and that's script assembly definitions. They're now in Unity, and it gives you a lot of the same functionality and features without having to go to creating DLLs and then compiling them and then re-importing them and dealing with the extra headache that it adds. And then for scriptable objects, I use them for very specific things, but not as a general architecture. And ECS, I just hold off until it's fully baked and fully out there, out of alpha and beta, and people are using it in a lot of real world projects. That's what I'm waiting for, at least. Okay, let's see. I have a criminal history due to past problems with alcohol abuse, but I've been clean for 3 years, done rehab, outpatient counseling, see a regular mental health specialist, and I'm graduating with honors from college with an associate's in computer science. Are game dev companies judgmental on your past or forgiving? I'd say they're probably, unless you have something that's going to show up in a criminal background check that scares them, they're usually pretty chill. I remember when I went to my first game dev job. I don't want to I don't want to say too much about it, but they're pretty forgiving, and they're pretty calm about most stuff, substances and other things. It's not nearly as big of an issue as at some other places, and also a lot of places just don't do background checks. So I'd say unless you have something like violent and scary on there that have really freaked people out, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And even then, like I said, a lot of places aren't going to run a background check. If you're relatively calm and cool, shouldn't be too much of an issue. And again, mostly people care about whether or not you can get the job done and whether and you're okay and fun to work with, right? That's the main stuff there. I worked at a company that strongly discouraged the use of comments in code. The rationale is if you felt you needed to comment in the code, you should either be naming variables better, naming your methods better, or breaking methods into smaller sub-methods based on their functionality. Do you have a philosophy on this? I 100% agree. They are 100% correct. If you have to write a lot of comments in your code, the code needs to be refactored. It means that the code isn't easy to read, it isn't easy to follow, and it isn't easy to understand. The only real use for comments, in my opinion, is explaining why you're doing something. There's two different times that people put comments in. There's what they're doing, they're explaining what it's doing, or they're explaining why it's doing something that seems weird. If you're explaining what you're doing, you need to refactor your code. You need to rename it, change it, make it cleaner, and make it so that as I'm reading the code, I can tell exactly what it's doing. If it's confusing, if you're putting these giant ternary operators and multiple conditionals on a line, you're just confusing people and making it harder to read for no benefit at all. So split the stuff out, rename it, make it clean. But the one place, again, for comments where they do make sense is when you're doing something that you have to do that might not make sense, and you're trying to explain why it's doing this. Like, this is doing something weird, and you're like, hey, I know this looks weird. This is the reason for it. This is why. Sometimes it's because of some external dependency. Sometimes it's just because there's something going on that just you wouldn't intuit from reading the code, no matter how well written it is. Generally, code that's full of comments it's full of lies, because comments don't change with the code. People refactor, people fix code, people change code. People almost never change the comments. Comments are just, I'd say, a sign of less clean code. Cleaner code should be easy to understand and easy to read. And yeah, I 100% agree with them. Hi, I'm new to coding and interested in game development. I've started teaching myself C# and plan to learn Unity after gaining more coding knowledge. Would Unity be able to handle large-scale RTS while having decent, good graphics? Yes. Just wondering if long-term Unity will do what I want, or if I should focus on learning C++ for Unreal. No, you could definitely do that in Unity. There's absolutely no reason you couldn't do a large-scale RTS with beautiful graphics and tons of games. I actually plan on making one day soon. Okay, we make a video about animations and player rigs. Sometime soon. I don't know exactly when, but yeah, I'd like to do that sometime soon. Hello, you got any tips to create real-time wash system for Unity in which clean dirt is made? Oh, with the easy decal system. I wish I did, but I don't. Sorry. I'm trying to go through these really quick because I'm already way over my time. Who works more hours, AAAs or indies? Indies. Generally, I think I talked about that a bit at the beginning, by the way, if you're interested in that. One of the first things I was talking about was those differences there. So indies generally tend to work more, in my experience. How would you implement mirrors in Unity? Camera render texture or a mirror material? A lot of the time I'd go with it depends on the exact scenario. If it's just, yeah, it depends. It depends a lot on the game, sorry. Both of them are possible options depending on how you've got things set up, what your render pipeline looks like, and what the use of those mirrors is. I mean, most of the time it's going to be some sort of a mirror material and rendering tricks, though not necessarily a render texture. But if you want to do some weird stuff with it, a render texture can get you some interesting things that I think are harder to do without. Hi, Jason. Love your videos. They helped me a whole bunch while studying at uni. Do you think you could cover Photon? I'd love to make digital turn-based board game, but lack netcode knowledge. I mentioned earlier we're going to do a stream on high-performance networking in Unity. So if you guys are interested in that, just make sure that you drop a comment down below so that Kyle sees it. Whenever comments become available on here, just drop a comment, and we're going to do one hopefully this week talking a lot about networking. We'll probably talk about Photon and a bunch of other network systems. Do you think Steam is becoming too crowded for VR games to be published without a publisher? No, but I think that for a VR game to stand out, it needs to be interesting, unique, and polished. It used to be very easy to have whatever you wanted on there. There wasn't a lot of content. The first VR game that I released, I did in a weekend as a tutorial and published it, and it sold great because there wasn't much on there. I would say I don't think you need a publisher, but you definitely need to have something interesting and good on there. What's more profitable, sell large or small asset packs on the stores like the asset store? Both. So you want to sell small asset packs that have like introductory level stuff. We have a couple things in there, and then sell bigger packs where people can build out and finish their game. Most of the time, people want full packs that are themed that they can use to build stuff out. They want, they might grab one or two little things. So I'd put like the one or two free or cheap things up there, and then have a bigger asset pack or sets of asset packs that all match the theme, because people want to build a game and they want to make it all match and look right. So you want to have a bigger pack for everything. But make sure that it's stuff that people are interested in too. Okay, so I've really been struggling with the Unity animator system. Do you have any advice for animating moving hitboxes or general practices for recycling animators, like using sword swing across multiple sword models? So the sword model should probably just attach and not necessarily be part of the animation. That should be separated from the animation. You might have different types of animations for different types of swords, like you got a two-hand sword, a one-handed sword, and a couple different animations for those. But I wouldn't have the sword in there. I'd have those as a child that's getting attached. For hitboxes, an easy thing you can do is just use the ragdoll generator and have it generate hitboxes for your character automatically that move and animate with your character. You have to tune them up and tighten them down and stuff, but it's a good way to just throw together really fast hitboxes that are relatively close to accurate, much better than a capsule. And that's just under game object, 3D object, rigid body. Go play with that. It's really cool. I did a video on that too. And I'm using a lot of find object of type and get component, but I'm told these are very slow and should be avoided. What approach would you suggest instead? They are slow if you're doing them in an update, if you're doing them constantly. What I like to do for these, and what most people recommend, is just use them in Awake or Start and find the thing that you need, cache that locally, and then use that locally cached version of it. So like in your Awake, you'd do get component animator and assign that to an animator. Underscore animator equals get component animator. And then use that underscore animator. Don't call get component every time you want to access it. Just get it once, cache it into a variable in your class, and then use that cached instance. All right, I just hit 92 of 92 questions. Share my desktop. That was a lot of questions. I'm really out of breath, and I need to take a little break. So I just wanted to say thanks again, everybody, for coming. And please, if you don't mind, on your way out, just hit the share button, hit the like button. Yeah, send it to your grandma, like I said. She'll be interested, and go check it out, or put it up on Facebook or whatever. Wherever you saw it, just go share it, please. It'd be really helpful. And again, if you're interested in the networking stuff, put a comment in the video, just so that Kyle sees how excited you guys are to talk to him about networking and just get cool, interesting info on that. We'll talk a lot about high performance networking with eNet, and maybe I can get him to show off some of his cool demos. And if you guys have questions, we'll do this again sometime in the next couple days on networking and non-networking stuff. So just keep an eye out, be subscribed, hit the little bell thing, and I'll see you then. Again, thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun. Hope you guys did too.